Hi everyone, Effie here. This is my second video for the day. I'll be using our new Peony Garden Cling Background Red Rubber stamp to make this card shown here. I'm really excited to introduce this stamp because it's the first red rubber background stamp in our line. It's 6x6. So let's get started on making this card. I'm just going to take a piece of scrap paper and cut it down to about 6.5 by 8.5 inches. And this is just scrap paper that I'll be using to stamp the background stamp onto as a guide, because today's card uses vellum as the card panel, and you'll see in just a couple of minutes. So I'm placing my scrap paper into my MISTI, and then I'm just going to, I've already placed my background stamp onto the MISTI, and I'm just inking it up right now. It doesn't really matter what ink you use, but right now I'm using Avery L Conch Shell. It's a really cute orangey color, but it really doesn't matter what ink you use because this is just a guide that I'm stamping out. It's not going to be used in any card or anything. So also, as you can see on the bottom right corner of my stamp, there are some cutouts on the stamp, but just note that this is how the samples came to me. When you order yours, it's going to be a solid 6x6 square, and there aren't going to be any cutouts in your stamp. Again, this is just how they were sent to me, but it works perfectly fine and it will work the same. Now that I've stamped out my guide, I'm just going to clean off my background stamp with a baby wipe, and just make sure you wipe it down really well, because we're going to be stamping the background stamp in Versamark ink next, and if you don't clean off your stamp that well, some of that ink that's left on the stamp will transfer onto your Versamark ink. And I'm a little OCD, so I get a little crazy if things get on my Versamark ink pad. I've pre-cut some vellum. I'm using Ellen Hutson's 40-pound vellum. I've cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm placing it over the stamped image to see what part of the stamp I want on my vellum. I'm going to adhere the vellum onto my guide, and I place the adhesive on both top corners of my vellum because those two corners will be stamped by the solid portion of the stamp, and I know that because I use my guide. Now I'm just going to prep my vellum for heat embossing, and I'm using my EK Success anti-static powder tool. This will help with making sure that I don't get stray embossing powder over the areas of the stamp where there is no Versamark. And now I'm just going to ink up my background stamp with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to make sure that I ink the stamp up really well, because I want to make sure that when I stamp my vellum that I only have to do it once. Even though I have my MISTI and I can do it a second, it'll make it easier to stamp it a second time if there are any missed areas. I just want to make sure that I do it right the first time. Now you just see me pressing down on the MISTI rather firmly so that the image on the stamp gets transferred well onto my vellum. What I also did was, when you open up the MISTI after this step, the scrap paper and the vellum comes off the MISTI, and it kind of comes with the stamp, as you can see here. So what I did was, to make sure that the Versamark coverage on the vellum was that I wasn't going to have any issues with that, I kind of just pressed down on the back of my scrap paper, which has the guide on it. I just kind of pressed down really well, and this will also help to make sure that you have good coverage on your vellum. Now I'm going to carefully peel away the vellum from the stamp, but again, you want to do this carefully because you don't want to smudge the Versamark on the vellum. You're also going to carefully peel the vellum from your guide, because there are the two portions on the back of the vellum where I adhered it onto the guide. So I'm just going to do that carefully. I'm taking the vellum around the bottom left portion where it's not the solid portion of the stamp. Now you can see that there's a little bit of orange behind the vellum, but don't worry about that because it's going to be covered by gold embossing powder later on. So here I'm using my Versamark Ink Pen to go over some areas where I saw that the Versamark ink didn't really get stamped onto it. Once I was happy with the coverage of the Versamark ink, I started to begin my heat embossing technique on this card. I'm using a Ranger Gold Glitter embossing powder for my card today. It's a really gorgeous, shiny, and glittery powder. Before I started pouring the embossing powder onto my vellum, I made sure to put some more scrap paper down under the vellum to catch the embossing powder because this can get a little messy. And the scrap paper is going to help me get the powder, all of the powder, back into my embossing powder container. Now I'm just going to pour this all over the front of my vellum. After you're done with this, you have to kind of be careful when you pull the vellum, I guess, off your scrap paper because you don't want to touch any of these solid areas where the embossing powder has stuck onto your panel. So this was a little tricky, but just remember the placement of your card and where the non-solid areas of your card was stamped. Once you get some good placement on your vellum, you can see the embossing powder falling away from your stamped image, and this is somewhat satisfying too to see this. It's just gorgeous stamp, and I'm so happy with the design and the way it came out, and the fact that I can use this stamp to create a beautiful glittery image. It just makes my heart so happy. If you find that you have any stray powder on your card panel, you can just take a small paintbrush and brush away the powders. Now I'm just going to get all of my embossing powder back into the container, and after I've done so, I'm going to take my heat tool and get ready to apply the heat onto my vellum. But before I actually apply it onto the vellum, I'm going to make sure that it heats up for a few seconds to get it nice and hot. And I'm going to work really quickly as I apply the heat onto the vellum because I don't want the vellum to warp that much. And because it's vellum, it's going to warp a little bit when you apply the heat. But the trick is to keep moving your heat gun quickly over your vellum, and just make sure that you work quickly, and you can see the transformation as the embossing powder begins to melt. So your vellum is going to warp a little bit, and it can't be helped. But one trick that I've learned from my DT member and friend Ruby, who is fabulous, and she is a really, really great card maker. One trick that she taught me was to place your card under some books, and that'll help de-warp your paper. So I tried that with this piece of vellum. I just placed it under my planner for about like 10 or 15 minutes, and when I lifted my book up, it did help with the warping a little bit. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I took my planner off my vellum panel, and as you can see, it did help a little bit. So now I'm just gonna turn my vellum over and take off the adhesive that's on the two top corners, and as you can see, it is being covered by the solid portion of the stamp where the gold embossing powder is on the front. So it's not really an issue, but I do want to take the adhesive off because I can. Now I'm going to start my Copic coloring. I'm going to start with the Peony that's on the top portion of the card, and I'm going to start out with lipstick red, which is R29. The lighter shade that I'm going to use for this Peony is RV21, which is light pink, and you'll see me color with it later on. But for this Peony, I'm only using these two colors, lipstick red and light pink. I don't have an in-between shade, but these two blended nicely together, even though it's red and pink. But They did blend nicely together, and I'm really not going for a perfect look here. As you can see, I'm just kind of haphazardly putting in my dark shading right now. It doesn't have to be perfect. When you turn your vellum panel over and you look at the front, it's still going to come out really nicely. All the while I'm coloring, I'm kind of lifting the vellum off my craft table so that I can see through where the lines are, because I want to make sure I stay in the lines. Now I'm going to start coloring in the second peony, the larger peony, but this time instead of the lipstick red, I'm going to use Dog Rose Flower, which is RB25. After I finish putting in the RB25, I'm going to go in with the light pink RB21 again to blend in both shades. And you can see that the peony on the top, how it's blended, and it looks gorgeous like this. This actually, I might make another card without the gold embossing, but I might kind of make a card this way, and it kind of looks like a watercolor effect. It's much more vibrant on this side than on the other side, because the vellum does mute it when you color on the back, but when you just color on the back, it actually looks nice, and I'm quite happy with the way this is coming out. So maybe I'll create another card, but use this portion where I'm coloring instead of coloring on the back. If you happen to get any Copic coloring outside the lines, you can just take a colorless Copic blender and go over the portion that's outside the line, and that'll kind of erase the color that's outside the line. That does help. Now I'm going to start coloring in the leaves with Emerald Green, which is G05. That's my darker color. And then I'm going to blend that in with Chartreuse, which is YG13. Now here you see me going in with my colorless blender because I did get some green outside the lines. I colored in one of the background areas where there wasn't a leaf. But now the vellum is finished, and when I turned it over, you can see that the colors aren't as bright, but when you actually put it behind the white cardstock, which I am going to do, the colors are vibrant, and the effect is beautiful. I'm just going to create a side folding card base for to put the vellum on top. I'm taking Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock for my card base, trimming it at 5.5 along the long side. And after this, I'm going to take my scoring board and score it at 4.25. And then this is going to be my side folding card base, which my vellum is going to be adhered on top. Next, I'm going to take my Tombow stamp runner, and I'm going to put it over the 3 corners of the vellum. These are the corners where you have the gold embossing powder, the solid gold embossing powder on the front. Because you have that melted embossing powder, you can put any type of adhesive behind there and it won't show. So I'm just going to adhere the vellum onto my side folding card base, and you're going to see that you have the one corner where you have the large pink peony on the bottom corner. That's kind of left kind of just to flap around, but I'm going to take care of that in a second. I'm going to use Tombow Mono liquid glue, and I'm going to put that along the lines of that large peony on the bottom in the back of the vellum. Oops, I just dropped it, but I'm going to use this, and I'm just going to put little dots along the lines on the back. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bone folder, because it does have a sharp end, and kind of smear the dots along the lines. You want to make sure that any adhesive you put on the behind the vellum is going to be hidden behind something, because you don't want any of the adhesive to show on the front of the vellum. So here you can just see I'm putting tiny dots of adhesive, and I'm just running my bone folder along the tiny dots to connect them, but this is going to create tiny lines behind the vellum to help adhere this corner of the vellum. So I thought this card came out nicely, and I'm sorry that it took kind of a long time. But in all honesty, once you get the shading down, this card won't really take you a long time. And here I made a second card, and the gold embossing really is just so eye-popping. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll join us for the rest of our release week as we're debuting 9 stamp sets for our 3rd release. Thank you for stopping by, and thanks for watching. Bye!